I never thought that the quiet reading of my husband's will would end up being the day I lost my son for good. When the lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded that final page, I watched Alex's face tighten, his jaw twitching like a cornered animal. Then he exploded. It happened so quickly, I almost believed I had imagined it. Alex stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched across the hardwood floor, and his voice, his voice, echoed against the cold, sterile walls. "Sign everything over, or this won't end well." I froze. My late husband's memory was the only thing grounding me in that instant. My breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. I glanced around, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a sick joke. But no one did. Alex's wife, Lisa, sat across from me, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't place. Was it triumph? Or relief? I looked at Alex, really looked at him. His face was red, his hands clenched into tight fists on the mahogany table. This was my baby, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knees, the one who used to beg me to stay a little longer at bedtime. And here he was, barking orders at me, like I was some nuisance standing between him and a payday. A part of me wanted to get up, run out the door, and never look back. But my body wouldn't move. I felt small, fragile, and so very old. The lawyer, Mr. Randall, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He cleared his throat, eyes darting between us. "Mrs. Mercer, you're under no obligation." But Alex cut him off. "Shut up. She knows what she needs to do." His voice was lower now, almost a growl. I looked down at Charles's watch in my lap, my thumb brushing over the scratches on its face. He had worn it every day for 40 years, even on the day he collapsed in the garden. He used to say it reminded him to come home in time for dinner with me. I swallowed, trying to force my voice to work, but nothing came out. My son, my only child, was demanding I give up everything Charles and I had built together, every sacrifice, every late night working, every careful investment. The room started to feel too small, the walls inching closer, the air turning thick and heavy. I felt Lisa's gaze drilling into me, as if she was already cataloging the furniture she'd move, the renovations she'd make. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice whispered that I needed to stand up, scream, throw the papers in his face. But another part of me, the part that had been quiet for too long, told me to keep still, to survive the moment. When I finally looked up at Alex, our eyes met. His were hard, unrecognizable. Mine were wet, blurring the face of the boy I used to know. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. And in that silence, something inside me shattered. A crack that I knew I'd feel echoing inside me for the rest of my life. After the will reading, I thought Alex might calm down. Maybe he would reflect on his words and feel ashamed. But that same afternoon, he cornered me in the hallway of our family home. The home his father and I built with every scraped dollar and every sleepless night. His footsteps were heavy, echoing like a threat on the wooden floors. I stood there with my back against the wall, clutching that old watch like it was a shield. "Mother," he began, his voice suddenly sweet. So sweet it made my skin crawl. "I know today was dramatic, but think about it. You can't handle this inheritance on your own." I couldn't find my voice. My tongue felt like lead, thick and useless. He took a step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're not strong enough anymore. The taxes, the repairs, the investments. It's too much for someone your age." I opened my mouth, but the words stayed stuck, as if they'd died before even reaching my lips. He smiled, and it wasn't a son's smile. It was the smile of a wolf who knows the lamb won't run. "I can help you," he continued, putting a hand on my shoulder. His fingers dug in, sharp and demanding. "All you have to do is sign over the management rights to me and Lisa. We'll take care of everything. You can just relax. Isn't that what you want?" Some part of me, the part that still remembered how he clung to me during thunderstorms as a boy, wanted to believe him. To believe that underneath all this greed, there was still a son who loved me. But the other part, the part that felt my husband's watch burning into my palm, knew better. Alex mistook my silence for agreement. He started nodding to himself, as if the decision had already been made. "You see, it's for your own good," he said, his voice oozing with false tenderness. In that moment, I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I was too afraid to fight. I saw his eyes light up. He thought he had won. He turned, calling out to Lisa down the hall. "She's on board." My heart sank into my stomach. I had always been so quiet, so eager to keep the peace, even when it meant swallowing every insult and every cut. I thought that was love. I thought obedience was the same as loyalty. As they moved around me, already discussing which accounts to freeze and which bills to handle, I felt myself shrinking smaller and smaller. But I said nothing, just nodded again. Alex smiled then, a thin, victorious curve of his lips. He leaned in and kissed my cheek, and I stood there, frozen. "Good," he said. "We'll start tomorrow." They turned and walked to their car, their steps quick and sure, leaving me standing there under the harsh afternoon sun. I watched them drive off, my keys still clenched in my hand. My fingers ached from gripping them so tightly. I knew, deep down, that I had just handed over everything, that in my silence I had given them permission to erase me. And, the worst part? A part of me agreed with them, but another part held a small flicker of hope, urging me to keep fighting. They moved in the very next week. Lisa claimed it would be temporary, just until they sorted out the estate, but I knew better. They arrived with a moving truck full of labeled boxes: home office, kitchen essentials, master bedroom. Each label felt like a quiet declaration. "We're staying." On the first morning, I came downstairs to make my tea, only to find Lisa already in the kitchen. She stood at the marble island, my marble island, sorting through a stack of mail as if she'd lived here her whole life. "Oh, good morning, Ellen," she said without looking up. "I've gone ahead and set aside the bills and important letters. You don't have to worry about these anymore." I glanced at the pile she had pushed toward the edge. It was my mail, my name printed neatly on each envelope. Before I could protest, she slid a small floral tin toward me. "Your vitamins," she said sweetly, like I was a child who needed to be reminded. I took the tin without thinking, my hands trembling slightly. Alex walked in then, his hair still damp from a shower, wearing Charles's old robe. I stared at the robe for a moment too long. He noticed, and gave a little shrug. "Oh, found this upstairs. Comfy, right? You don't mind, do you?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Instead, I looked down at the floor tiles, tracing the tiny cracks Charles had refused to fix because he said they, quote, gave the house character. By the afternoon, Lisa had collected all my credit cards and tucked them into a plastic envelope. She handed it to Alex as though they were confiscating dangerous weapons. "You won't need these," Alex said gently, patting my hand. "We'll handle your expenses. You just focus on enjoying yourself." Enjoy. That word again. When I went upstairs to my room, now Grandma's suite, as Lisa called it, I saw they had moved my sewing machine into the hallway. The framed photos of Charles and me on our anniversary were gone, replaced by a minimalist print of some faceless woman in a sun hat. I stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. It was as if my entire life had been erased overnight, replaced with something sterile and curated, like a staged model home in a glossy brochure. That evening at dinner, they laughed about new renovation plans. Lisa wanted to redo the garden and convert Charles's study into a quote, wellness room. I sat at the far end of the table, the same table where I once hosted Christmas dinners for 20 people. I barely touched my food. My fork scraped against the plate, each sound echoing louder than their laughter. When they finally noticed I wasn't eating, Lisa leaned over and gave me a sympathetic look. "Oh, Ellen, is this too spicy for you? We can make something blander next time." I nodded. It was easier than arguing. Later that night, I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the spot where Charles's favorite painting used to hang. My reflection in the glass door looked small, ghost-like. This was my house, but I no longer felt at home. I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, a ghost drifting room to room, unseen and unimportant. And for the first time since Charles died, I realized I wasn't just alone. I was invisible. I couldn't sleep. The house, my house, felt like it had shrunk overnight. Every corner seemed to echo with Lisa's laughter, Alex's heavy footsteps, the clink of their wine glasses. I wandered down the hallway, hoping to find some comfort in the dark. My feet carried me into Charles's old study, or what was left of it. The bookshelves were half empty. Stacks of boxes labeled "Donate" lined the walls. I stood there, tracing my fingers over the dusty woodwork, when I noticed a small panel under the desk. Charles had always been handy, building little secret compartments to hide birthday gifts or letters. I knelt down, my knees aching with every movement, and pushed the panel open. Inside was a wooden box, the surface nicked and worn with age. My breath caught in my throat as I pulled it out. The box felt heavy, as if it held a piece of him still alive. I sat on the floor, my back against the desk, and opened it. Dozens of letters, each in Charles's unmistakable handwriting. Some were dated before we married, others from when Alex was born, a few from our final years together. I picked up one marked, "For Ellen, when you need it most." My hands shook so badly, it took several tries to open it. "My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, I know something must be terribly wrong. I always told you that you had a softness this world didn't deserve, that you gave too much of yourself and forgot to keep some for you. Please, if there's ever a moment you feel cornered, remember this. You built this life with me. You have every right to protect it. Don't let anyone, not even Alex, take away what we worked for. You are stronger than you believe. I know it. I've always known it." I pressed the letter to my chest, trying to hold the warmth of his words against the chill creeping up my spine. Tears slid down my cheeks, but they weren't just from sadness. There was something else there, too. Anger, maybe. Or something even deeper. A spark. For the first time, in what felt like forever, I felt something other than resignation. I read through more letters, each one echoing the same message. Protect what we built. Stand up. Don't let them reduce you to a shell. Charles had known this day might come. He knew me better than anyone. By the time I closed the box, the sun was starting to rise, its light cutting through the room in thin golden lines. I held the final letter against my heart, whispering into the empty room, "I hear you. I'm so sorry it took me this long." I stood up, my joints stiff, my mind buzzing in a way it hadn't in years. I slipped the letters back into the box and tucked it under my bed, hidden from prying eyes. That morning, as I passed Lisa in the kitchen and Alex in the hall, I felt something different inside me. A quiet, pulsing warmth that refused to die. They didn't notice, they didn't see the shift, but something had woken up in me. And though it was small and trembling, it was there. A spark. I sat on the edge of my bed all morning, Charles's letter folded neatly under my palm like a secret prayer. I kept hearing his words echoing in my head. "You are stronger than you believe," but strong felt like a foreign language to me. I had spent so many years smoothing conflicts, keeping the peace, letting everyone else's wants come before mine. My hands shook as I picked up my old address book from the nightstand drawer. The pages were yellowed and brittle, corners curled like dead leaves. I flipped through it slowly, my heart pounding with every turn. When I reached Martha's name, I stopped. My oldest friend. The one person who had known me before I was Mrs. Mercer, before I was Alex's mom, before I became invisible in my own life. I dialed her number, my fingers clumsy. Part of me hoped she wouldn't answer, that I could pretend I tried and leave it at that. But she picked up on the third ring. "Ellen? My God, it's been ages." Her voice sounded exactly the same. Warm, familiar, full of life. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first, just a strangled noise. "Ellen, are you okay?" "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharpening with concern. That's when the dam broke. I started sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The words tumbled out in broken pieces. Alex, the will, the house, the cards, Charles's letters. I heard her inhale sharply on the other end. Then silence. The kind of silence that listens. "Oh, honey," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You should have called me sooner." I choked out. "I didn't know who else to trust. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm disappearing, Martha. Like I'm being erased from my own life." She was quiet for a moment. Then her voice returned, stronger. "Listen to me carefully, Ellen. You are not alone. I know someone. A lawyer, Julia. She's helped women in situations like yours before. She's discreet, trustworthy. I'll call her right now and have her reach out to you. You don't have to face this alone anymore." Hearing that, "you are not alone," made something crack open inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a flicker of relief slip through the despair. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "You can," Martha said, firm now. "You can, and you will, and I'll be right here with you. You don't have to fight them on your own." We stayed on the line a while longer. I didn't say much. I just listened to her breathing, felt the warmth of her voice like a blanket around my shoulders. When I finally hung up, my body felt like it had been through a storm, exhausted, but somehow lighter. I hid the address book back in the drawer, careful not to leave any traces. Downstairs, I could hear Lisa laughing on the phone and Alex clinking glasses, probably planning some new improvement to my home. I pressed Charles's letter against my heart and closed my eyes. Help was coming. And for the first time since Alex demanded my silence, I believed I might actually find my voice again. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. I lay there in the dim light, the edges of Charles's letters pressed into my palm like a quiet vow. I knew I couldn't afford to wait for courage to arrive fully formed. I had to build it piece by piece, breath by breath. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to let the floor creak. Downstairs, the house was silent. No clatter of Lisa's cooking, no echo of Alex's heavy steps. I tiptoed to my office, or what used to be mine, before Lisa started calling it the transition room. They had cleared most of my papers, but they had missed one important drawer in the old oak file cabinet. My fingers trembled as I pulled it open and started gathering. Copies of account statements, old tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies. Each document felt like a tiny shard of my past self, each page proof that I once had a life that belonged to me alone. I stacked them neatly, wrapped them in an old scarf Charles had given me on our 25th anniversary, and hurried back upstairs. I knelt by my bed, heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would wake them. I pushed the bundle far underneath, next to the box of letters. When I stood, my knees cracked, but I felt something steady settle into my bones. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, whispering to myself, "You can do this. You are not weak. You are not invisible." The words felt foreign at first, almost silly. My voice sounded small, like a child rehearsing lines in a school play. But I said them anyway, over and over, until they became a pulse in my veins. Some nights, I pictured Alex's face when he demanded I sign everything over, the way his eyes turned cold and sharp. I practiced meeting that look in the mirror. At first, I couldn't hold my own gaze for more than a few seconds before my eyes dropped to the floor. But each night, I forced myself to try again. I imagined Charles standing behind me, his hands on my shoulders, whispering that I was stronger than I knew. I imagined Martha's voice cheering me on. Meanwhile, downstairs, Alex and Lisa moved through the house as if they already owned it, rearranging furniture, replacing the curtains I'd picked with Charles years ago, adding their cold, modern touches. I overheard Lisa talking to a friend one afternoon. "We'll probably just redo the whole layout once the paperwork is finalized. She won't fight us. She's too frail." Too frail. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I felt the sting, but I didn't let go. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when she came. I was sitting in the sunroom, though there hadn't been sun in that room for months, pretending to read one of Lisa's bland design magazines. My eyes skimmed the pages, but I wasn't really seeing anything. I was listening for footsteps, for keys in the lock, for any sound that meant they were home. When the doorbell rang, I flinched so hard the magazine fell from my lap. Lisa usually answered the door, but she was out shopping for statement pieces for the new living room. Alex was at some lunch meeting. For once, the house was mine, even if just for a breath. I moved cautiously, peeking through the curtain before opening the door. There she stood, a woman in a soft blue raincoat, her hair pulled back in a simple twist. She looked like someone's kindly aunt, not a lawyer. "Ellen," she said gently, her voice warm and steady. "I'm Julia. I'm an old friend of Martha's." Hearing Martha's name nearly knocked me off my feet. I opened the door wider without thinking. She stepped in, dripping rainwater onto the entry rug. As soon as the door closed behind us, she reached into her purse and handed me a business card. Julia Nien, attorney at law. It read in small, elegant letters. Something inside me crumbled. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my pulse hammering under my skin. She took my elbow and guided me to the dining table. The same table where Alex and Lisa had laughed about tearing down my garden. We sat. My fingers twisted the edge of my sleeve until the fabric nearly tore. "It's okay," she said softly. "Martha told me everything she could, but I need to hear it from you. Start wherever you can." I tried to speak, but all that came out was a choked sob. She didn't push, she just waited. And so I started. I told her about the will reading, about Alex screaming, about Lisa's cold smile. I told her how they took my cards, my accounts, my house, how they had taken pieces of me every single day until I barely recognized myself. I told her about the letters from Charles, the voice inside me that had been whispering for weeks, trying to wake me up. By the time I finished, my throat burned raw. My cheeks were wet, my hands trembling so violently I had to hold them under the table. Julia didn't interrupt once. When I finally fell silent, she reached across and covered my shaking hands with hers. "You are not crazy," she said, her voice steady and low. "And you are not alone. We are going to fix this, but I need you to trust me and be brave. Can you do that?" I nodded, a small, desperate motion. She squeezed my hands tighter. "We'll move carefully. We'll make copies of everything you've saved, and we'll keep this hidden until the moment is right. You are going to take your life back, Ellen." A sob tore out of me then, not just of grief, but of relief. I hadn't realized how heavy it was to carry this alone until someone else finally stepped in to help me hold it. We spent hours going over the hidden documents, whispering like two conspirators in a war neither of us had asked for. When Julia left, she hugged me tightly. I felt her strength seep into me like warmth into cold bones. As I watched her disappear into the rain, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying Julia's words over and over. "You are going to take your life back." When the morning light spilled through the curtains, I felt as though I had aged a decade overnight. My joints ached, my head throbbed, but beneath all that was a quiet thrum. Determination, or maybe something close to it. Julia arrived again just after dawn, slipping in silently like a ghost. She wore a simple black coat and carried a battered leather bag. We sat at the dining table, this time without hesitation. She laid out the documents one by one, her fingers moving with calm precision. "This is a power of attorney revocation," she explained, tapping the first page. "This voids any authority Alex might think he has over your affairs." My eyes darted to the dense legal language. The words blurred together, swimming on the page like frightened fish. "This one," she continued, sliding another form forward, "transfers your assets and the house into a protective trust under your sole control. No one can touch it without your explicit consent." I felt my breath hitch. My fingers hovered over the paper, trembling as though they didn't belong to me. Julia's voice softened. "I know this is terrifying, but this is the moment, Ellen. Once you sign, you start reclaiming what's yours. You start reclaiming who you are." I looked up at her then, my eyes filling. I thought about Charles's letters, about the long, silent dinners, about the garden they planned to rip out, the pictures they replaced. I thought about Alex calling me frail, about Lisa talking to me like a child. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who built a home from nothing, who stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, who once argued with a contractor for hours because he tried to cheat us on the porch renovation. I didn't know where that woman had gone, but maybe, just maybe, she was still buried somewhere inside me. I gripped the pen so tightly my knuckles turned white. I hovered over the line for what felt like an eternity. My hand shook violently. Julia didn't rush me. She just watched, patient, unwavering. Finally, with a breath that felt like a leap off a cliff, I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed. My name looked strange there, like seeing a ghost, like meeting an old friend after decades apart. When I finished the last signature, Julia let out a quiet sigh of relief. She gathered the documents carefully, sliding them into her bag as if they were priceless artifacts. "Ellen," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, "you just took the first step back to yourself. It might not feel like it now, but you'll see." I nodded, though my body felt drained, as if I'd run miles without stopping. After she left, I sat at the table alone, staring at the dent in the wood where Charles had once dropped a heavy serving dish on Thanksgiving. I laid my hand over it, feeling the rough groove beneath my palm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just remembering him. I was fighting for what he had always believed I could be: strong, capable, unbreakable. It happened faster than I could have imagined. I was still sitting at the table, my hand tracing the dent in the wood, when I heard the front door slam. Alex's voice boomed down the hallway. "Mom? Where are you?" My heart seized. I looked at the pile of papers Julia had left me to keep for my records. Copies of the trust, the revocation, my newly reclaimed power. My power. I scooped them up, clutching them to my chest like a lifeline. He came barreling into the room, his face flushed from the summer heat, or maybe from whatever lunch meeting he'd just stormed out of. His eyes locked on the stack in my arms. "What is that?" he snapped, his eyes narrowing. For a second, I felt my old instinct kick in, the urge to shrink, to lower my eyes, to apologize for things that weren't my fault. But I didn't. I forced myself to stand up slowly, my knees creaking, my heart banging against my ribs like a trapped bird. I met his gaze and held it. His face twisted in confusion at first, then something darker crept in. Suspicion, anger, fear. "Give me those," he ordered, stepping forward with a hand out. I took a step back. The papers pressed tighter against me. I could feel my pulse everywhere. In my fingertips, my throat, my temples. "No," I said. The word sounded foreign coming from my mouth, small and rough. He froze. It was as if the air in the room had been sucked out. "What did you say?" he hissed. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady. I said no. Alex took another step toward me. His eyes darted to the side, as if expecting Lisa to appear and back him up, but she wasn't there. "I don't think you understand what you're doing," he said, his voice lower now, measured, like he was talking to a skittish animal. "You're making a big mistake, Mom. You're not in your right mind." I felt a tremor go through me, but I didn't look away. I thought of Charles's letters, of the woman who used to fight for the things she loved. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but strong enough to echo in my own ears. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but stopped. His jaw twitched, his hands balled into fists. In that moment, I saw him clearly, not as my son, but as a man who thought he could bend me to his will, a man who thought I was too weak to resist. I held his stare. My legs felt like they might give out any second, but I didn't move. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, two statues locked in a silent battle. Then, without a word, he turned and stormed out of the room. I heard his heavy steps retreating down the hallway, the front door slamming behind him so hard the floorboards shook. I stood there in the sudden quiet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My knees finally gave way, and I sank into the chair. The papers were still clutched to my chest, wrinkled and damp with sweat. I closed my eyes and let out a single, shaky breath. I had met his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. I barely had time to steady my breath before Julia stepped into the room. She had been waiting in the hallway, just out of sight in case things went bad. I hadn't even realized she'd stayed behind. When she appeared, she looked calm, collected, a living shield. She held a folder in her hand, her grip firm. Without a word, she turned and followed the sound of the front door slamming. I stood up on shaking legs and followed her, my heart pounding so loudly I felt dizzy. By the time I reached the entryway, Alex had already stormed back inside, his face red, breath coming in sharp bursts. He stopped short when he saw Julia standing there. "Who the hell are you?" he spat, his eyes flicking between us like a trapped animal. Julia didn't flinch. She stepped forward and handed him the folder. "I'm Ellen's legal counsel. This is a restraining order effective immediately. You are to vacate the premises today." Alex's face crumpled in disbelief. He looked down at the papers as if they were written in a language he didn't understand. "This is a joke," he scoffed, tossing the folder onto the floor. "Mom, you can't be serious. You don't even know what you're signing. She's manipulating you." I felt the heat rise up my neck, my hands clenching at my sides. The old reflex, to back down, to calm him, bubbled up, but I pushed it down with everything I had. I took a step forward. He turned to me, waiting for me to fold. I opened my mouth. My voice felt low, steady, like it came from somewhere deeper than I'd ever dared reach before. "Leave my house." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. "Mom, you don't mean this," he pleaded, his voice cracking for the first time. I felt a tremor run through me, but I didn't let it show. I kept my eyes locked on his. "I do," I said. Silence spread out between us, heavy and sharp. Julia stood by my side like a silent pillar. Alex looked around as if searching for an escape, or for Lisa to materialize and save him. But the house was empty. Empty and quiet in a way it hadn't been for months. Finally, he bent to pick up the folder. His hands shook as he clutched it against his chest. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice small now, almost childish. I didn't reply. I just watched as he turned and walked out the door for the last time. When the door finally closed, the quiet that filled the house felt different. Not the suffocating silence of defeat, but a clean, sharp emptiness. I leaned against the wall, my knees nearly buckling. Julia put a hand on my arm, her eyes soft but unwavering. "You did it," she said quietly. I looked at her, tears welling up but not falling yet. "I did," I whispered, and for the first time, I believed it. After Julia set her number on my phone's speed dial and threatened my son to call the police immediately if something happened, she finally stepped back. She pressed a card into my palm. "Call me for anything," she said softly. "Anything." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Then she was gone. I stood alone in the entryway, the folded card digging into my fingers. My legs wobbled, and I sank to the floor right there on the rug. At first, I just sat in the quiet. Then the sobs came, sudden and violent. They tore out of me like a storm breaking open. I pressed my forehead to my knees and wept until my whole body felt empty and raw. I cried for Charles, for the young mother I used to be, for the woman who had let herself vanish so easily. I cried for Alex, not for the man he had become, but for the boy who used to hold my hand in parking lots and beg for one more bedtime story. When the tears finally slowed, I felt a strange stillness settle over me, like the eye of a hurricane, quiet and watchful. I pushed myself up slowly, using the wall for support. My reflection caught in the hallway mirror, and for the first time in years, I really looked at myself. The next week felt like stepping into someone else's life, a life I hadn't realized was waiting for me all along. Julia came over almost every day. She brought thick folders, legal pads, and a quiet confidence that felt contagious. She moved around my kitchen like she belonged there, making tea while I sorted through old papers. One morning, she arrived with a final set of documents in a leather folder. She laid them out carefully on the dining table, the same spot where Alex once told me I was too frail. "This is it," she said, tapping the top page gently. "Your house, your accounts, everything, all officially under a protective trust, solely in your name. No one can touch it without your explicit approval." I stared at the stack for a long time. My fingers traced my name printed in bold letters. Julia paused, then added softly, "I also included the foundation donation, just like you and Charles discussed." I looked up sharply. "The Charles Mercer Community Fund," she said. "I set aside a portion of your estate to support local scholarships and garden restoration projects. I remembered you telling me about his dream to give back." For a moment, the room felt too bright. My throat closed up, and I pressed my hand to my mouth. Charles had always wanted to create something lasting, something that would keep his love for this town alive, even after we were gone. I thought of all the nights he sat at the kitchen table, scribbling ideas on napkins, talking about helping kids who need a push and saving that little rose garden by the library. I felt him then, not as a ghost, but as a warmth beside me. My hand hovered over the pen. Julia didn't rush me. She just stood there, her eyes gentle, as if she knew exactly what this meant. I signed. It felt different this time, not like signing away, not like surrender. This felt like sealing a promise, a piece of Charles's heart stitched into the community he loved. When I handed the pen back, Julia took my hands in hers. "You've done more than reclaim your life," she said. "You've honored his." A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. That afternoon, after Julia left, I walked the house alone. I opened Charles's old closet and found his gardening gloves still folded neatly on the shelf. I pressed them to my face and breathed him in. I went into the living room and touched the piano keys, the same ones Alex used to pound on as a toddler. The notes rang clear, filling the space with echoes of another time. I stood by the window and looked out at the garden. I could almost see Charles there, crouched by the roses, grumbling about aphids, his sun hat crooked, his eyes soft when he caught me watching. I whispered into the empty room. I kept my promise. But I knew this isn't going to end this easily. One evening, they came. I heard their voices before I saw them. Lisa's sharp, impatient edge, and Alex's strained attempts at calm. I stood quietly by the upstairs window, watching them pace at the gate like restless dogs. Lisa kept pointing at the house, her gestures wild and angry. Alex's shoulders slumped, defeated but still trying to cling to whatever scraps of power he thought he had left. Part of me wondered if I should even bother, if I should just let them shout themselves hoarse and leave. But something inside me knew this was my moment, the moment to show them, and myself, that I was no longer the woman they had cornered in that lawyer's office. I walked to Charles's old study and opened the French doors to the balcony, the same balcony he used to lean on, sipping coffee and waving at neighbors. I stepped out slowly, the evening air sharp and clean against my skin. They looked up immediately. Alex's face flickered with surprise, then confusion, then something like fear. Lisa's mouth fell open. I stood tall, my hand resting on the railing, my chin high. "Mother!" Alex called, his voice cracking on the word. "Please, we need to come in. We just want to talk." Lisa jumped in immediately, her words slicing through the air. "You're making a scene. Let us in, Ellen. You don't understand what you're doing." I took a deep breath, feeling the wood of the railing warm under my fingers. The sky behind them was turning gold and purple, the garden below glowing softly. I looked at them. Really looked. I saw the desperation in Alex's eyes, the cold calculation in Lisa's, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel outnumbered. I felt whole. I opened my mouth and spoke, my voice carrying across the yard, steady and clear. No. The word was so simple, so final, it seemed to hang in the air like a bell. Lisa stepped forward, her hands balled into fists. "We're your family. You owe us." I shook my head slowly. "I don't owe you anything." Alex's shoulders slumped even further, and he looked down at the ground. I saw the truth settle over them in that moment. I was no longer theirs to manage, to manipulate, to control. I stood there until they stopped shouting, until they realized I would not come down, would not open the door, would not bend. Alex staggered backward, his hands still clutching the torn legal papers like a lifeline. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, hunched, pale, his shoulders rounded inward as though the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. Lisa turned on her heel and marched toward their car. She yanked the door open, threw her bag inside, and without another glance at him, she drove away. I don't know what surprised me more, her cruelty or the sudden silence that swallowed the driveway once she was gone. Alex dropped to his knees on the asphalt. His head hung low, the papers slipping from his hands, fluttering in the breeze like wounded birds. I pressed my palm to the window pane, feeling the cool glass beneath my skin. A single tear slid down my cheek, then another, until I felt my whole face wet. I wasn't crying just for Alex. I wasn't even sure if I was crying for him at all. I cried for the boy I once held close, the child who used to chase fireflies in the backyard, who used to scream with joy when I lifted him into my arms after a scraped knee. I cried for the mother I had been, the woman who had given every piece of herself believing it would be enough. The next few days moved like a quiet storm. I didn't hear from Alex, and I didn't expect to. The house, once heavy with their presence, now echoed with an unfamiliar stillness, a stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like possibility. It was Julia who called first. Her voice carried both relief and caution. "Lisa filed for divorce," she said. "She's already moved out, staying with a friend in the city." I didn't respond at first. I just let the words drift into the quiet kitchen, watching the morning light spill across the floor. "And Alex?" I finally asked, my voice surprisingly calm. Julia hesitated. "He checked into a budget motel on the outskirts of town. Seems he's trying to sort things out alone." I closed my eyes, breathing in that sharp, bittersweet ache. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a tired sort of acceptance. The consequences were theirs now. I no longer needed to carry them. I looked out at the freshly painted walls glowing softly through the windows. It looked nothing like it did before. And for the first time, I didn't see Charles's ghost or hear Alex's demands echoing off the walls. I saw me, a woman who had finally chosen herself, a woman who wasn't waiting to be saved or loved or understood, a woman who was rebuilding, one bold color at a time. I pressed the warm mug to my lips and let out a long, slow breath into the twilight. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd start on the upstairs hall, maybe even the kitchen cabinets. But tonight, I would sit with this moment, this soft, defiant peace blooming in my chest.